Planning a research project starts many months before we actually go to the field. We start off by doing our background research. First, we start talking to other students, teachers. We start reading other books and articles that have been written about the subject we're interested in. Before we even know what questions we want to ask, we start to look at all the information available to gain an idea of what knowledge gaps exist so that we can fill those gaps.
When I started to plan my research at the University of Maine, I knew that I wanted to study the UN climate negotiations. So I reached out to a few experts who I had met at previous conferences of the parties in Durban, South Africa, and Paris, France. One of the experts is from Bangladesh and is an adaptation specialist, and the other is an IPCC author from Guatemala. Since they've been studying the UN climate change negotiations for so many years, they had a lot of great advice on where to begin and what would be the best use of time for what I would be studying. With their advice, I did a lot more reading to learn more about the subject area, and then I was ready to form my preliminary research questions, like we talked about in the last episode.
Once we know our research questions, we need to figure out what steps we need to take to answer them. This takes a lot of planning, whether we're going to camp on a glacier, working on islands in the South Pacific, or going to UN climate change meetings.
To go to COP24, we started planning in April for the trip in December, 9 months in advance. In order to attend the COP, you need to be approved by the United Nations. And to show that you have this approval, you receive a COP badge. The badge signals that you're an official member of the meeting, and our badges say that we are observers to the UN meeting because we're not there as our country's representatives, but rather there to watch what our country representatives are doing.
There are lots of details to figure out for us to do our research in Poland. First, we need to figure out where we're going to stay, what we're going to eat while we're doing our research. Then we need to figure out how we're going to get there. Maine to Poland's a long trip, so first we'll start by driving to Boston. In Boston, we'll catch a plane to Amsterdam in the Netherlands. From Amsterdam, we'll then fly to Krakow, where we'll then take a bus to Katowice, where the UN climate meeting is going to be.
Research at the COP in a city with between 20 and 30,000 other people is a different fieldwork experience than we've seen in past seasons, whether it was on a glacier or on the Maine coast. So it means we need to prepare differently for this different type of fieldwork. This means that we need to bring different types of supplies. In our case, we bring audio recorders, computers, and notebooks. But more importantly, we also need to plan for what the agenda is for the meeting. Because there are hundreds of meetings happening at the same time, we need to figure out where we're going to be and when in order to use our time most effectively. We need to put ourselves in the position to meet people that we want to talk to and learn from, because social science relies on learning about other people's ideas and opinions and thoughts.
This year in Poland, I'm going to follow the research and systematic observation negotiations. These negotiations are really important because it's how science feeds into the negotiation process. For example, this group talks about how satellite observations are determining greenhouse gas concentrations around the world, like we talked about in the previous episodes. To follow these negotiations, you not only need to know when and where they're going to be, but you need to know what they've talked about in the past and what they're planning to talk about now. Knowing the history behind how these negotiations have developed is really important to understanding where they're going to go in the future. For this reason, we've attended previous COPs, and we're attending this COP to better inform our attendance at future meetings. We figure out what's going to be happening at these meetings by reading policy documents ahead of time and by talking to people while we're attending the meeting in Poland. These conversations are fundamental to shaping our research. Talking to people allows us to understand what's going to be happening at this meeting so we can better focus our time and effort. Just like when we're looking at a glacier, we might find something that's unexpected. This also happens when we're at the COP. Because humans are constantly changing their minds, we never quite know what to expect when we attend these meetings. This means we need to be really flexible with our research. We have the complicated task of trying to understand what underlies decision-making at these COP meetings. Even with all this planning, sometimes things go wrong and we need to adjust while we're conducting our research.
Not only do we as researchers prepare for the COP, but the delegates representing the different countries prepare as well. This year, they even held an extra meeting in order to be prepared for the meeting in Poland. It might not sound like a big undertaking to have an extra meeting, but when you need to get representatives from almost every country in the world together in Bangkok, Thailand for a week, a lot of planning is involved.
Countries also prepare by requesting additional scientific information. This year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, as we talked about in our last episode, prepared a report for the delegates based on how the world would be different under a 1.5 degrees Celsius or a 2 degrees Celsius warmer world. This report is going to drastically change how the negotiations proceed this year. Countries will use this report to ask questions of each other and of scientists to better inform their decision-making. Here are some questions for you to think about as we talk about planning and carrying out investigations.
If you were planning a trip to the COP, what would you want to study? Maybe you're interested in climate change mitigation or adaptation, how countries are paying for the impacts of climate change. You could also be interested in the role of education and climate change, women, indigenous people, agriculture, or maybe something else.
Why are you interested in this topic? What questions do you have? Tweet at us with your ideas. Don't miss our next Twitter session where you can ask us more about our research and the COP. Join us for the next episode where we'll talk about analyzing and interpreting data.
Thank you for joining us on this season of Follow a Researcher, from UMaine to the UN.